Hello, and welcome to a special edition of the BA Brew. I'm Debbie.
I'm Filip.
I'm Ian.
And today we're going to talk about this. Ian and Filip's book called Brainy Glue that they wrote about business analysis. And I'm fascinated to find out a few things about this book and about the process to producing it. But I'm going to start off by going to Ian and saying, okay, Ian, why? Always start with why. You say it in the book. So why did you write the book?
We do. So I think the idea started with me. I've always thought that I've always, I guess, been able to express things in writing. And I've always wanted to write a book. But I didn't know what to write about. I was never going to write anything classical. I wasn't that good. But they always say, write what you're good, what you know about. So I know about business analysis, and I thought if I write about business analysis, then nobody will scrutinize the kind of classical writing then that you would expect with a classical novel. So I said, right, I'm determined to write a book, but I didn't think that I had probably the motivation with everything else going on in my world. I didn't have the motivation to keep it going, so I thought I'd want to write it with somebody. And I met Filip, and we'd shared some thoughts. He's had some, some fresh thoughts and different perspectives, which I quite liked, and his experience. And he's a very good talker. And I called Filip and I said, "Do you want to write the book?" And he said, "Yeah, okay." We didn't really. All we knew at that point was we wanted to write something different. So we said, okay. And what we did then, we agreed to meet in an Airbnb. We spent 5 nights in London, and it had this big white wall. We had lots of post-it notes, as you do, and we created the scope for this book. And I think we spent the first half day saying, how can we make it different? And I think it was inspired by a friend of ours, Chris Potts, who wrote the Fruition trilogy. And one of those books was Recreation, and I'd read it recently, and that is a novel. So the different part of it we did was the novel part of it, the storyline, which I'm sure we've got to go into it in a little bit later. But it's important to us it was different. And from an individual perspective, we spent a lot of time together, you, me, Tina, Adrian, Lynn Gervin, and I never had a book. And I was the only one without a book. So I felt a bit light. So from me, I thought, right, determined to write a book. So when I go into these meetings, these panels, I've got a book. But I'm going to pass on to Filip because we took it further than that, didn't we? Spent 3 years.
Yeah, well, I hadn't written a book either. And I'm the kind of person that first answers yes, and then realizes what I just did, what I just got myself involved into. So also here I said, yeah, writing a book, great, sounds wonderful. But then indeed we spent that week in London with the entire storyline on the wall. We started turning it into more tangible details, like small chapters, a clear focus of each chapter, what's going to happen, what is the main character going to do or going to learn or going to experience. And so after that week, we had the entire storyline mapped out. The key element we came up with over a beer at the pub, which is also important. That is definitely an important part of the creative process. And then it was only a matter of writing, which took us about 3 years. Well, because of a number of things. We have a lot of other things going on, professional, private stuff. But also because it's a novel and not a textbook, it's much more challenging to get the balance right. And you don't want to describe some analysis technique in an elaborate and somewhat boring way because it breaks the story. But you also want the story to be relevant in a BA context. And so where Ian was focusing more on the storyline and writing it out, and I was focusing more on the BA stuff, trying to get that connected, that was like a really big challenge. So we needed a lot of conversations, a lot of interaction among ourselves to get that right.
Yes, and it's quite interesting because now you've said that, I can get a picture of where this came from, because it's very difficult to write a book. It's very difficult to do anything with a blank piece of paper, isn't it? But if you are sort of merging story thread with techniques thread with a BA process thread, in some
Yeah.
ways, then there's a lot of interweaving to be done. So now I can visualize the pair of you in an Airbnb for 5 days with a wall covered in post-its. I can see how you made that work. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we came up with about 25, I think it was about 25 chapters we came up with. I think we ended up with something like 51 or 52.
Yeah, something around
So
that.
we just had to stretch a few. We lost a few, you know, it evolves, and we worked
Yeah.
remotely. But yeah, 3 years it took us, 3 years. And
Yes.
we both got commitments, you know. Philip's got a large family. I'm in the British Army Reserves, and sometimes we'd go months without doing something. But that's the beauty of having two people. One would say, come on, we've got to get back on the book, you know, and then it carries you going. But before you know it, you've written so much of the book that it's an asset that you can't just ignore. Then you have to finish it. I'm sure so many have written 1 or 2 chapters and then they don't have enough collateral to force them to say what a shame it would be if we'd been that, you know.
Yeah, it is fascinating, the whole process, isn't it? And obviously, from what you've just said, Ian, you took the lead on the actual storyline.
It made sense that as I said in the beginning, I've always wanted to write a story, and I can express things well. It's my first language, you know, although I speak Welsh, it's my first language. Well, it's not Filip's. So what we said was I would write the story, and Filip had a lot of input into the story and wrote some of the sections, you know, where I was lacking inspiration perhaps. But we've got 25 techniques that we've woven into, as you know, because you were one of our reviewers. So
Yes.
so we're ever grateful for that. So thank you for your steering. But yeah, it was Filip who said, okay, we can do the 25. He developed those, and then a little bit of fresh thought into how can we reposition those, you know, and I take a different perspective at some of those. Because as you know, you can have a technique and you can use it in different ways, can't you?
Yes.
You know, like we talk
Absolutely.
about Poppet, don't we? And there's several uses of Poppet.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, because I was looking through the book in advance of our discussion today, and this is going to be a query for Filip, because I suspect from what you've said, you had a hand in steering maybe some of the technique sides of things. Not to say you didn't both collaborate on it. I noticed a thread, and one of the threads is you talk a lot in the book about worldview, perspective, standing in people's shoes.
Mhm.
There's a lot of personal agendas explored in different ways. This is something that I think is so important in business analysis, that ability to understand that people are people with different ways of seeing a situation. So, Filip, how did that come about? Because it's come through so clearly as a thread through the book to me.
I guess that's a key element of the book is you can apply techniques, but it's about getting the conversation going with people and among people. It's about not just understanding as a BA what's happening or what's in people's minds or what are people's behaviors and drivers. It's about making sure other people understand each other's drivers and thoughts and history. So I guess it's an element that is relevant anytime, anywhere you apply any kind of business analysis technique, which is probably why it shines through in so many of them. I remember we have one takeaway in the book mentioning everyone has a history, and the HI is in brackets because it's a history and a story as well. And you have to understand the story that's behind someone saying, I think this is important, or I think this is right or wrong. So I guess that's indeed an important key message. Make sure that you understand what's behind the things people are saying when you apply a technique. Don't just apply it blindly, but get that conversation going and get that shared understanding in the group.
The one we talked about mainly, and we've talked about it, Debbie, is that business case section in it. We took months over that. Do we get that right? And whether, you know, when we had a kind of talk about it, didn't we, at BA Brew? And it's whether we do a short kind of BA on a business case on a canvas and then discuss that, or we produce a big, massive document. And but what we said was we're not going to say you need to do one or the other, but we'll have that conversation in the text. So different views, different perspectives and challenges as to what what kind of technique or what version of the business case we wanted to produce in this instance.
Yes, and it's that thing, isn't it? No matter which part of the process you're at, you have to think about, well, who's the audience for this? And business case is a classic example of that, because part of that audience, at least, is going to be the person who holds the budget or has the funds available that they can say yes to whatever the initiative is. And understanding, I like the history, HI story sort of thing, because I think you have to understand that. And we talk a lot in business analysis about stakeholder engagement, but I sometimes think that we don't always analyze how we go about stakeholder engagement. But I think some of the things you've brought out in the book is very much that analysis around the stakeholders and just people looking at the world differently, depending on where they're standing and what their history is. And the business case, I think, is a classic example of that. But there are others in the book as well, like the impact of change. That's another one that I think you explore.
Yeah. For me, change is also, again, part of something we've tried to integrate in most of the techniques. As a BA, you are dealing with change from the very beginning. The first conversation you have about any kind of problem or new initiative, you are working on a change. So taking a technique and looking at it through a change lens, how is this going to help us implement this change? How can people that we are mentioning, like stakeholders on a stakeholder impact grid, people that we are mentioning, how are they impacted by the change, but also how can they co-create the change with us? Having a change lens for each and every technique that we apply, I think is very, very relevant, and it's going to make you much more impactful as a business analyst.
We talked about you talked about audience, and the audience for our book. We thought long and hard about this. I mean, the journey is that you have to have a business case in there somewhere in the middle. So we had to not pitch it too technical, but some people work as business analysts and they work in a small team or maybe a big product and they report into a senior BA. They sometimes don't see the bigger scope and sometimes don't fully get what the role of BA takes. So we wanted to give that range of what the role is and tell it through story, through storytelling. And I think we had to get that balance between developing characters, developing techniques so much that we kept it down to 25 techniques. As I said, our audience was probably junior to senior BAs, although we've had senior BAs and lead BAs enjoy our book. But we've kept the price down to lower than £20 just because that's our target audience. And yeah, we've tried to give the fuller picture so people walk away with it and think, now that's a story which brings it to life, what a BA actually does and how they can impact change.
Yes, and it's interesting because I think that's one of the things that's really important about the book is that holistic case study that allows you to take a story from a very early stage and seeing a business analyst actually being able to communicate with senior stakeholders, operational stakeholders, really uncovering a problem and saying, let's look at some quite innovative options, but very inclusive, collaborative options that we can then take forward. And then taking it forward and then making sure that, it's piloted, it's experimented, it's fed back in so that you can then improve things till getting to that point of success at the end. And I think that holistic case study that the story offers, that you've woven the techniques into, it really does help, doesn't it, to bring the essence of business analysis to life, which I think we're all going to support, aren't we?
And which, interestingly, does not contain much IT.
No.
Which is somewhat on purpose because I have a technical background. I love technology. I think technology is a very powerful enabler. But ultimately, it's about how do you improve the business. I think that's also interesting to see how much broader you can take business analysis than just the systems.
Yes, absolutely. So my question to you both, and I'm going to come to you first, Ian, for this. If you are thinking about your mid to senior BAs who are your audience for the book, yeah, what would be the number one takeaway you would want them to take from reading this book?
Oh, that's a good one. There's probably two come to mind, but I'm going to go with my first one, and that's working visually. So I always work with I work with a lot of BAs that are on the start of their BA career, and I always say, rich picture. Do a rich picture. It gives you context of what you do, even if you draw them out of scope. You know, you've got that. So work visually. There's a lot. We've been very lucky to have colleague of Filip's to put the illustrations together, and they're fantastic. We're really pleased with them, and I think that there's a lot more things in that book in terms of the avatars, but let's make things more visual. Let's take people on the journeys. Use them as a great communication tool. You know, so and again, when younger people or inexperienced people are starting work on a new project, then to create that rich picture so that the picture grows with their knowledge. So it never reaches the final, the final product, but it's always grown, and you can then share that with other people, your understanding. So that's my thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I must admit, I agree with you, because I love rich pictures. I love mind maps, all of those things where you can draw a diagram of something. I quite often analyze, lots of different situations to do with assist, to do with lots of things to do with business analysis or business change. And I quite often just get a piece of paper and start sketching things, because that's how I think. And then I can see this holistic picture allows me to pull the threads together. So I'm spot on. So Filip, over to you then. What's your number one that you want people to take away from the book?
Just do it. I think that one of the discussion points that Ian and I had was the age of Abby, our lead character, because she's quite experienced and she's confident and she goes for it. So how experienced, how old should she be? How senior should she be? And we decided to keep her quite young. And I hope that it's kind of an inspiration for people. There's a lot of people that can help you if you want to prepare something, but often as a BA, I think we tend to overthink and overanalyze things and be too worried about going for something, trying out a new technique, do it in a smaller, safer group, get up to the whiteboard and start drawing, start applying the technique and see what happens, and learn to facilitate that conversation. So I hope that it gives people a perspective and the confidence to start trying out things and building experience that way.
Yes. And it's interesting you say that, because it always reminds me of situations I've been in where I've been exploring various ideas for change or problems. And I've thought, oh, I'll try using this technique. And sometimes that technique isn't a good one. It doesn't quite work. But it tells me, okay, let's not look at it that way. How about we look at it from this angle? And if you've got the toolkit, which again, the book gives you, then you can do that, can't you? You can say, let's just try it. I mean, what happens if that technique isn't the right one? Nothing. We just try another one, but we've learned something. So that's absolutely great. So final question, really, if anybody wants to buy the book, where can they get it?
So the website is brainyglue.com.
Okay.
They can purchase the PDF there, which basically sends an email to me, and then I take care of the practicalities. And it also contains links to Amazon, where you can purchase both the Kindle version and the paperback. Amazon, UK, US, different Amazon websites. So brainyglue.com is the place to be.
And if you go
Brilliant.
on brainyglue.com, you can download the first 16 chapters for free. So you can find out if you like it. And if you want to read the rest of the story then and find out what happens.
Excellent. At Assist, we're always very keen on a try before you buy. So that sounds a great tip to pass on. So thanks ever so much, guys. It's been fascinating, because I know you both, and Ian and I work together on various things all the time. And I never knew you got together in an Airbnb for 5 days to map it out. But can I say that is really, really impressive? because sometimes it's the only way to do it with a book, isn't it?
Yeah.
So thanks ever so much. And I hope anyone who's watching this version of BA Brew have enjoyed our discussion. And if you have any ideas or thoughts about anything you'd like us to discuss, then please do send them to us at babrew@assistkd.com. And don't forget to like or subscribe. Thanks very much.